Hello, welcome to ESG Talk at MMU, ESG for higher education students. My name is Raida Arif. I am happy here today in our Studio A with our guest speaker here, which is Mr. Ng. So hello everyone. I know all of you are excited to know more about ESG. So I am here to guide you onto the journey into the world of ESG, environmental, society, and governance. Now, but before that, I know you guys are so excited to listen to more about ESG with our guest speaker here. First of all, I would like to guide you through the things that we will cover for this talk. And the first one that we will cover on the key components of ESG. The second, we will discuss how these principles shape environmental challenges, social responsibility, and ethical leadership. And last but not least, we will also cover on how understanding ESG can enhance your career prospects. Okay? So, without further ado, I would like to introduce you Mr. Ng Hon Seng. Mr. Ng Hon Seng is an expert. He is an expert
Thanks for
in
that.
ESG and sustainability. He is the founder and managing director of My ESG Syndrome Berhad, a leading consultancy in Malaysia specializing in ESG services. My ESG helps businesses adopt sustainable practices with a focus on environmental management, social responsibility, and corporate governance. Mr. Ng is also a trained environmental engineer, the author of Environmental Technical Guidelines, and the founder of ESA, which specializes in environmental due diligence and forensic science. He also served as the Honorary Secretary of the Business Council for Sustainability and Responsibility Malaysia. With over 25 years, Mr. Ng,
Yep.
wow, of experience in sustainability field, Mr. Ng will share his insights. And this is what we are here for, his insights on how ESG is shaping the future of business and why it's important for students, all of us, to understand these principles. So, Mr. Ng, we'll start with the first question, yeah?
Sure.
And this, I think this is the fundamental.
Yep.
And most of us, I believe the students would like to know, and we go deeper into it. But first of all, could you help us understand what ESG stands for and how it differs from CSR and sustainability?
Yep. Thank you, for
Raida,
Raida.
yes.
Yep. So thank you for MMU, for inviting me over for this MMU talks. Let's go back to the fundamental. ESG is actually built on the fundamental of sustainability. Yeah. Perhaps before we go into the details, delve into the details of what ESG really means, let's go through some general evolution of how ESG comes about. Yeah. I think the world has, in the past over a couple of 10 years, we have gone through tremendous changes. The world in the past would have been very capitalism focused, and therefore it's all about industrialization. It's all about profiteering and whatnot. Not until the recent years, back in the 60s, there was a book, called The Silent Spring, which is by a lady with the name of Rachel Carson. That book really was the very beginning of the social awareness about the environmental protection and the importance of looking after the environment while the business continued to prosper. And the Silent Spring basically spoke about the pesticide contamination. Back in the old days when the farming industry first discovered pesticide has been very effective in ensuring a more productive harvest. And pesticide have been rampantly used without looking at the negative downside, to human health and the environmental well-being. Until the book comes about and revealed that there are a lot of negative impact as a result of economic development. Yep. So that book really set the tone, in the 60s, and subsequent to that, there are quite a number of events that happens in the United States, especially the infamous case of Love Canal was one of those back then, that has caused massive contamination, and as a result, an organization like Environmental Protection Agency was then formed in 1969. Yeah, and that was the awareness or awakening of the environmental awareness. Environment is the start of the ESG, frankly. Yeah, because environment, you like it or not, is somewhat relevant to social. Yeah, environment by itself, we are the user, we are the benefit factors of the environment, and therefore directly, being environmentally conscious is in a way socially responsible. It was basically a societal movement at that time until a commission would then form back in the 1980s, where there's a famous report which is called Brundtland Report, that was published in 1987 under the United Nations or WCED at that time. And the book is what we call Our Common Future. There was a commission called Brundtland, Brundtland Commission, who actually started to look at, with the finite resources that we have in the world, how would the whole world be heading towards? Yep. That's where sustainability or sustainable development was first coined. Yep. And since then, there were a lot of discussion around it, but a lot of those discussions are at a very policy level or philosophical level, until as such that where all the finance sector under the former Secretary General of United Nations, Kofi Annan, they come together and convene and have a meeting, and eventually they publish a book. This is coming from this finance sector. That's really big impact. Because the finance sector then came together and talked about, hey, we as the driver for all the economy development in the world, what is our what is our responsibility? And that's why the book was published in 2004, which is a book that famously called Who Cares Win. That basically means that in the past, all this so many years, the industry has been focusing on profiteering. But the book basically say that if you care more than just profiteering, you will be able to excel. You will be able to have a more robust business. That's where it set the whole tone differently. Because once the finance sector involved and committed to that, obviously after that book, there were a lot of other initiatives basically initiated by the finance industry. One of those are the Principles of Responsible Investment, PRI, that basically outline a few principles in which that governs the finance industry. Certain things that you shouldn't be investing or pouring money and a fund, that kind of activities, So that really where it started, And subsequent to that, I think one of very momentous years is actually in 2015. That was a year when there are quite a lot of things that happens. The most important milestone is actually the Paris Agreement. We know that as it is now, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, is currently convened in Baku, Azerbaijan as we speak now, which is the Conference of Parties of number 29, the 29th time the whole world came together and talked about climate change. So for the longest time, since I think back then in the 90s, when the Conference of Parties for Climate Change was first convened, there are quite difficult decisions to be made, concluded from the convention itself. Why? Because greenhouse gas that cause global warming, right? And who should be responsible for more, and who should pay more for whatever the environmental damages that cause, So that becomes the biggest struggle, in any of these conferences in the past, Not until COP21, the Conference of Parties in number 21, that happens in 2015 in Paris, That's when the France government has been moderating, and eventually the whole world had came together and agreed on a Paris Agreement. And Paris Agreement really set the tone for how the world should combat, climate change. And that's a very important milestone at the time that happens on 2015. And subsequently, there is also a very important milestone that happened, following up from the finance industry, who had already set for all these principles. I think generally the finance industry, the banking sector realized that, hey, come on guys, we are the drivers of the economy, but that we have not taken into consideration climate risk in the entire world economy, what would be the impact of the climate change to the economy, So that's what concerning, to the bankers, to the central bank governors and whatnot. And therefore, there was a task force that is led by the gentleman with the name of Michael Bloomberg, the founder of Bloomberg, who actually was tasked to come up with a protocol for the finance industry to then quantify what could be the monetary impact, the financial impact of climate risk. That's what we call TCFD, Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, that came about. Those are very important milestones that set the tone of what happened in the past couple of years. Yeah, and another very important milestone that happened in the same year, in 2015, is actually the Sustainable Development Goal. That's what the first year Sustainable Development Goal was first launched. Of course, we know the Sustainable Development Goal is a goal that's set by the United Nations. Its intention is actually to make sure all the member parties of United Nations, all the countries, are aligned in terms of some global common goal. When we have common goal, then we allow a lot of investment, a lot of R&D, focusing on certain aspect. And with that, we hope that there will be significant advancement in certain aspect to address those issues. And the world had proven many times in the past, that when they come together, focusing on something, they would see a significant advancement or improvement on certain subjects. Case in point would be poverty eradication back in the days when preceding Sustainable Development Goal. There is another goal which is called Millennium Development Goal, where poverty eradication was one of the main agenda, and the world had came together, and obviously they worked together, and obviously they have seen changes happen as a result of the common goal that everybody shared. So these are the three main agenda that happened in 2015, and subsequent to that, that's still, we have some guidelines, we have some protocol, we have some principle, but still the uptake from the industry are still lukewarm. People are still not quite coming into ESG and whatnot. It was not until 2018, when the CEO of the largest private equity, largest fund, in this case BlackRock, the gentleman in the name of Larry Flint, came about and came out with a letter that addressing to all the CEO of the companies that BlackRock invested. The letter basically goes with the fact that the tone that BlackRock is expecting the CEO to start observing ESG, and that would be a key performance indicator as far as all this company that BlackRock had invested would have to be aligned with. So that really set the tone very differently. In the past, we have been talking about United Nations coming out with all this principle for responsible investment. We're talking about TCFD, where the bank governors were trying to figure out how we define certain issues and whatnot, until BlackRock, have this letter that really set the tone very differently for the industry. Come on, if this is a CEO of the largest fund in the world, you're talking about trillions of dollars that they're managing. If a CEO of that scale, a company of that scale, would basically wanted to embrace ESG, that would mean something, right? That if somebody would also be tagging along, that really has revolutionized or really awakened, a lot of the industry, and that's when, the ESG become a lot more mainstream at the time. So that's a brief introduction of what we have came through. Coming back to the question, I know it's a very long answer to your questions, but it's important to understand some of the main agenda.
It's actually very interesting to hear the history and how it goes and how it turned out to be.
Exactly.
So, yes.
Yeah. And the more important thing is, this doesn't happen overnight.
Correct.
Because a lot of people were basically saying that ESG is something that, is a buzzwords of the day, but it has came a long way before it became what it is today. It takes a lot of awareness from the society, and eventually, the United Nations aware about it, and later on the industry, and later on how would it then being operationalized at the business level. This is the whole evolution of how ESG came about.
That's the word, evolution.
Yeah.
True.
So going back to the question earlier on, Raida, about
differences.
the difference of sustainability and ESG. Yeah. Sustainability, as I mentioned earlier on, there's this report called Our Common Future, isn't it? Yeah. Our Common Future by Brundtland Commission. That was a very important document. That documents basically coined the words of sustainable development. Yeah. Because before that, there are a lot of development going on, but there's no everybody would realize that the world is a finite resources. We can't be going on, the way that we are doing
Correct.
business all the time. In the past, there's something that need to be addressed, and people couldn't know what exactly that would means and how would they philosophically embed it back into the business. That's how Brundtland Commission came about. And Brundtland Commission basically coined the word sustainable development, and sustainability itself means many can means very differently to different people. In the context of business, that will basically means ensuring we address all these issues related to the business, as such, to make sure there is a robust and long-lasting business performance. That's what sustainability is about. But if you put that into the context of natural environment, sustainability will basically means, we want to make sure we continue extracting and benefiting from the natural resources to take care of the current generation. At the same time, we shouldn't be compromising the need of the future generation to meet their own need. So that's what sustainability, the definition of sustainability. But if you would ask me, can we come up with one definition for sustainability? Frankly, they are quite varied, depending on the context of which you're coming from. But sustainability is the fundamental philosophy that on which that SDG, ESG, and CSR, corporate social responsibility are built. They are all different program or scheme or framework, you want to whatever you want to name it, but the fundamental philosophy were all coming from the sustainability itself. So what are the difference of sustainability and ESG? ESG that we spoke about nowadays, it's actually specifically intended for the business community. Business community. In the past, businesses were actually evaluated, based on their financial performance alone. Whether you're making money, whether you're making a loss, how good are you performing and whatnot, right? That's how a business was being evaluated. But that obviously has its shortfall, because what about the non-financial risks? That has not been addressed in the past. So as such, ESG were actually developed with the intention to make sure, in addition to financial performance, business are also going to be evaluated based on the non-financial performance as well. So ESG is really a framework that helps business evaluate their performance and practices on sustainability and ethical issue. And sustainability and ethical issue, in short, are non-financial related. So to simply put it, ESG is a tool for us to evaluate the business performance from non-ESG, as a non-financial perspective. That's what it is all boils down to. We are supposed to be talking about, we mentioned earlier on, sustainability is the fundamental philosophy where all the CSR, SDG, and ESG were built upon, right? So we had briefly mentioned about what ESG really meant. Later on, we're going to come to what are some of the pillars and some of the themes of ESG. But before that, we also mentioned about corporate social responsibility. So corporate social responsibility, CSR itself, again, is a term coined, I think, in the 80s, in the 70s, 80s. Industry or businesses realizes that the important or interaction of the business with the society. They know that while they are making profit from the business, they want to make sure the relationship with the society are also positively enhanced. So as such, exactly, giving back, and those days when the philanthropists will be giving donation to the school or giving donation to the orphanage or whatnot, those are the time when the businesses realizes there's a role that they're playing for the society. But it was not in a structured manner. For the longest time, it was not structured. And nobody really couldn't figure out how to embed it back into the business, until the concept of corporate social responsibility came about, where it provides a structure around all these activities, or philanthropic activities, or social activities that the business is involved in. So that's how corporate social responsibility came about. It's a framework that allowed that giving back, or the social interaction with the business with the society or the community that they're living with. So that's what CSR. Yeah. So CSR again is very business focused. It's a very
Yes.
business focused activities, similar to ESG. ESG is very business focused as well, but ESG is a performance evaluation for non-financial risk. You know, I mentioned that earlier on.
Yes.
While SDG, on the other hand, is very different altogether. SDG is actually a common goal, the world common goal, you know, that was set forth by the United Nations, meant for all the member parties. Member party, who basically means all the countries, you know, who are the members of United Nations. The whole purpose, like what I mentioned earlier on, with the Sustainable Development Goals, countries would then be able to focus on the investment on R&D and addressing the issue. With that, you know, there will be synergies among all the countries, and the problem that the whole world are fronting, you know, would then be easier for them to be resolved. That I hope that it differentiate CSR, SDG, and ESG. CSR and ESG are very much business focused. SDG, on the other hand, in fact, it's actually would be a lot more relevant to the countries, you know, for the countries, and therefore Malaysian government has actually adopted and embraced SDG.
SDG.
That goes into our budgeting or whatnot. It's all
Yes.
aligned with SDG. Well, of course, there are companies who are aligned with SDG as well. You know, that's all that those are all commendable
Yes.
activities. Yeah. But SDG is fundamentally coming from the United Nations and meant for the countries. Yep, I think that's in a very long answer to your
I'm-
questions.
I'm actually processing, and I find this very interesting. Looking at what we have gone through,
Yeah.
the milestone and the
Yes.
reasons why we came to the extent that we have ESG finally. So
It's a long way coming, isn't it?
yes.
Yep.
So thank you so much, Mr. Ng. Not only the students, but also me. I mean, I learned a lot today with all the history and the Love Canal and so on. So it's really interesting. So I think maybe we can stop now.
Sure,
We
yep.
can go for a break. But everyone, first of all, thank you so much. Again, Mr. Ng, we'll take a short break, okay? We'll take a short break now. But please, don't go anywhere. Stay put. We will come back and we'll dive into the next topic, which is focusing on the three pillars,
Yes.
E, S, and G. So stay tuned and we'll be right back. talk. Yes. So in the second part, we will go deeper into the three pillars E, S, and G. Now let me remind you again what is E. E is environmental, society, and governance. So we start with E first. So Mr. Ng, we start with E. Yeah.
Yep.
So could you help us understand how environmental challenges are impacting students today, and how can students get involved in making a difference?
Yep, yep. Right, I probably will take a very long answer to your question again. Yep, yep. So we have just come through earlier on defining what is ESG, right? So before we move on further to answer your question about environment, I think it's very important for me to address these questions of who drive ESG,
Yes.
and why they are driving ESG, and how ESG has been driven. So I think first of all, who drive ESG? ESG was driven by was mainly driven by the finance sector. I mentioned earlier on, ESG is a set of criteria or the rating system or evaluation system on non-financial performance of a company, isn't it? So essentially, who is the intended audience of ESG? The intended audience of the ESG is actually the finance sector. They are the one driving it. They are the one driving it. So why are they driving ESG? Essentially, finance sector is interested in profit and loss, right?
Yes.
The business performance, right? While they have all the annual report, financial report, which is well covered, and I'm quite sure finance industry are very familiar, at the fingertips about the financial performance. They can read the financial performance of the company very well. But when it comes to non-financial risks, it's a very broad spectrum of all kind of issues. You're talking about environment, social, and governance. Yeah. So, how would the finance industry comprehend all this very complicated, interrelated E, S, and G matters? So as such, ESG was developed with the intention for non-financial performance to be evaluated in a very systematic, in a framework, so it will be consistent, and there will be apple-to-apple comparison as far as the business are concerned, that helps the finance industry or the investor, to understand the non-financial performance of the business. Otherwise, you can't be expecting a bankers, to start becoming an environmental engineers, to start becoming an HR person, or to start becoming a social scientist or whatnot to comprehend the issue, right? It's just not possible, isn't it? So there must be something that need to put in place to communicate, bridging the gap between the investor, the finance sector, and the businesses themselves, and that's why ESG came about. So there are a lot of factors that influencing the formation of ESG. Yep. Of course, there are international policy and regulation, there are local policy and regulation, there are government commitment, which is very important. Malaysia is not living in an island. We are actually very connected with the world through United Nations, and we do have, as a government, as a country, we do have our commitment. And also stakeholder expectation. These are the four main areas that influence the formation of ESG. Yep. Perhaps let's delve into a little bit more in terms of what are the international policy and regulation that has been, that has developed in the past couple of years. Yeah. You can see from the screen itself, over the past many years, the development nation like the United States and the EU were the one that have been driving a lot of those, the direction, how the world will be heading towards. Yeah. And there are some rules or regulation the world will have to be observing. A lot of us were then curious, why do we need to worry about how US or how EU govern their countries? Yeah, that has nothing to do with us in Malaysia, isn't it? Yeah. Unfortunately, the answer is yes, it has an implication on us. So a lot of those policies or regulations adopted or enforced in EU or United States, it has a cross-border effect on us, surprisingly. I suppose all of us heard about the issues of our glove industry. Our product was then withheld at the US Custom and Border Protection, CDP, CBP, back then in, I think, during the COVID times, I think there was a report that shown that there was about 4.2 billion ringgit of loss that suffered from the glove manufacturing industry. It was because of social non-compliance, labor right issues and whatnot. Yeah. So despite we Malaysia, all these glove manufacturing companies, they have been complying with the local requirement, Ministry of Human Resources requirements
Yeah,
or whatnot.
however.
However, when our product were to be exported to United States,
Non-compliance.
exactly, we are now actually need to be observing the local regulation in the United States and likewise in EU or whatnot. Yeah. So over the past couple of years, in the past 10, 20 years, United States used to be the one championing a lot of those global initiative. But of late, we have been seeing EU, have been championing a lot more of this kind of initiative. Back in, before 2020, you are seeing a lot of anti-slavery, modern slavery, or even forced labor related kind of policies that were adopted by all these countries, and that was one that we Malaysian glove manufacturers get caught a little bit, back then during COVID. So as time moved on to now recent years, because climate change has become a lot more severe, and therefore you have seen a lot of those EU initiative or EU policies has been very much primarily focused on climate-related or environmental-related requirements, such as the EU deforestation regulation, which fortunately, was withheld and therefore postponed for its enforcement. Otherwise, it would have been enforced by end of this year. That would be impacting a lot of our farmers, smallholders, in Malaysia. And we have also seen carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is in short we call CBAM. That has already been implemented, since in last quarter of 2023. And is expected to enter into force, where it will be going after expiring the entire transition period, it will go into the actual implementation period by January 2026. And that was the reason why Malaysian governments, during the budget announcement by our PM back then, last month, he spoke about carbon tax, right, to be imposed on our iron and steel industry as well as energy sector. So that was with the hope that we will be able to start imposing carbon tax before CBAM. Otherwise, if Malaysian products are not imposed with carbon tax, Malaysian product will be disadvantaged in a way, through the carbon border adjustment mechanism policies that the EU will be implementing. In addition to that, we have seen a lot of others policies, such as like a corporate due diligence requirement. Basically, it requires the EU companies to start, making sure their supply chain, the suppliers coming from Malaysia or any other countries outside EU, were actually those companies who are really who are ethically correct, who are socially responsible.
Yes.
They don't want to be affiliated or getting the supply from countries who are simply abusing human rights or violating any environmental regulation and whatnot. They simply do not want to be associated with that. So so the companies, especially EU companies, has that responsibility to make sure the supply chain are those companies who are socially responsible. So with that, you can imagine the impact to us in Malaysia as an export nation. So a lot of our SME in Malaysia would be affected because of all this different regulation. In addition, with the recent years, we have been also seeing EU companies were actually being imposed on the requirement to make sure they are also reporting on the sustainability performance. Yep. And that sustainability performance will not only could be confined within the company operation itself, the EU company itself, but also go beyond the operation, the EU operation, the European countries' companies' operation, but go into the supply chain to the EU company. That is the reason why it is so important to observe all these changes that's going on in the world, because we Malaysian will be directly or indirectly affected by it.
Yes, true.
So the next one that we were looking at is actually on the local policies. Before that, one very important point that I would like to bring up is also with the carbon that we spoke about earlier on.
Yes.
The world has, and especially through the budget announcement a couple of weeks ago, right? Our PM10 has basically mentioned about carbon tax, right? And carbon tax is a common instrument the government will be imposing in order to drive low carbon, so that the Malaysian would then collectively producing less greenhouse gases. And we all know greenhouse gases is culprit to global warming, and therefore they're causing climate change, isn't it? So there are quite a number of those instruments, main instruments that are currently being promoted by the World Bank. The first one being the carbon tax itself. Carbon tax is actually a tax that imposed on a company if the company were to be producing greenhouse gas more than they're supposed to be. Yep. So company will be given a threshold. If you are given 100 ton of threshold, for instance,
Okay.
and for that year you produce 120 tons, then in this case, the 20 tons will be imposed on the tax. Yep, that's what it is all about. The whole intention is to drive industry to make conscious decision or make conscious investment so that they will be investing into low carbon technologies as such to bring down the carbon emission. Yeah, and then the other common instrument is what we call emission trading system. So between the two companies, like Raida, you're running a company similar to my company. You know, we're both in the same sector, for instance, you're producing exactly the same thing. But because Raida, you have been investing it very intelligently, and therefore you have been able, the both of us are given a threshold of 100 ton, for instance, and you have been only generating 80 tons. You do have 20 tons surplus that we have not been consuming, right? So your 20 tons could actually be sold to me. So there will be a trading scheme between the two of us, you know. So because I'm not doing it right, and therefore I've been producing a lot more carbon than I should be, and I'm probably 120 tons, 20 tons more than my threshold, then in this case, your 20 tons certificates or allowance would then be traded with me. So I can buy the credit with you, you know. So that's what ETS, emission trading system, is all about. So this sounds very absurd because carbon, you know, carbon is carbon dioxide, isn't it? So
How
what
do
is
you-
exactly, how do you quantify, how do you verify,
Listen, yeah.
how would it even be something like a commodities that you will be able to trade it
Yes.
on the public platform, like Bursa is currently having a Bursa carbon exchange that meant for the trading of carbon credit. You know, can you believe that those are the things that the world has came to be, you know, and this is all part and parcel of the initiative to make sure the world is heading towards a low carbon economy in the future, and with the hope that we will be able to remove or reduce carbon emissions as much as possible, with the ultimate intention of curbing continued rises of global temperature. I think this is two aspects. I have two more other aspects I would like to address, which is the third one. Again, we mentioned earlier on carbon border adjustment mechanism, right? It is something quite new, and I told that earlier on. By January 2026, Malaysia products going into exporting into EU will have to be imposed with a carbon tax. So if Malaysia is not having any tax, Malaysian government is not imposing any carbon tax, and EU will then have to impose the same tax that they have been imposing for the same products in EU onto Malaysian products.
So we, Malaysian, has to incur the cost then.
Regardless,
The government,
regardless,
yes.
yep. So,
Understood.
but then if Malaysian government were to be already have a carbon tax system, then in this case, whatever the difference between the European carbon tax, you know, and Malaysia tax rate, difference will have to be paid to EU. Yep. And then, of course, the whatever tax that Malaysia has imposed, Malaysian government has imposed, that would go back to Malaysian government's coffer. So that's what it is. It is about carbon border adjustment mechanism. But the interesting part of a carbon border adjustment mechanism, based on one of the news that the Star had came out with recently, it basically say that Malaysia is significantly impacted by the CBAM this particular policies. Yeah, in fact, what worrying is that unfortunately, I don't think, you know, a lot of our industry are aware about this implication, and they do not understand as well that it is not just EU. A lot of other countries like the Japan, who have already made an announcement that they will be coming out with CBAM alike kind of system, and likewise UK, you know, United States and Australia and all these developed nations are one way or another coming out with some similar kind of policies. As such, that would basically means Malaysia have to be, you know, imposing a carbon tax on our products, and that would be a more competitive market in the future. Yep. And the next one that more concerning, I mean, earlier on we spoke about environment, right? We spoke about environment, but from the social compliance perspective, it is also something quite concerning as far as Malaysian business are concerned. This is a report about how much of Malaysia products. Earlier on, I did mention about
The 4 billion.
the 4.2 billion
Gloves.
dollars ringgits of gloves products, right? But that's glove products. That's glove product. That was in the past. That was in the past. And what was withheld? This is a report going back to. There's a report that was just published not long ago. I think June this year, and that's spoken about that tracked the record how much of shipment of Malaysian product that had been withheld by the U.S. Custom and Border Protection. Yeah, it was amounted to about 1.52 billion, the values of the product itself. Yeah, which is translated to about 7.07 billion. Over the past 2 years, and that involved about 500 shipment. And what worrying is that the gray bar that you can see from the chart itself, the gray bar, it basically largely coming from electronics. We were earlier on about glove manufacturing, isn't it? So
Lumber.
electronic industry, while we have a lot of electronic exports coming from Malaysia, right? And they are amounted to about 7 billion worth of products that have been withheld in the U.S. Custom and Border Protection. What does it tell us? That basically tells us that even an electronic industry, they have issues related to forced labor. Yep. So forced labor is a very common issue as far as Malaysia industry are concerned. So definitely Malaysia has a long way to go to make sure we are at par with our peers in the world. Yeah, to make sure that we are at par. I think those are some of the interesting development at the international arena. So moving on, we have local policies as well. I mentioned about Malaysia have our commitment. Unfortunately, I have to still fall back to the environment because environment is what we are talking about earlier on, right?
Yes.
So Malaysia has a commitment under the UN Paris Agreement. Paris Agreement that was signed in 2015. It was proposed in 2015 and signed in November 2016 at the time. Malaysia, of course, has ratified to the Paris Agreement, so we are parties to the Paris Agreement. Malaysia had committed a target, and target is what we normally term as nationally determined contribution, NDC. So Malaysia basically has committed to reduce our economic-wide carbon intensity against GDP by about 45% by 2030, which is about six years from now. Which is about 6 years from now compared to 2005 levels, and cover all 7 classes of greenhouse gas. And in addition, Malaysia also committed to be net zero as early as 2050. So 20 over years from now, 20 over years from now, you will be expecting Malaysia to be net zero. While we are at pace, we are at similar place as any other countries yet. In fact, we are very much aligned with UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. This is a convention that brings all the countries together to agree on the common goal. That's what the Paris Agreement is all about, right? The whole world came together and agreed that we must combat climate change, and that was what agreed at that time. So as early as 2050, that will basically means, and I was told that this particular commitment of Malaysia will probably going to be refined slightly, whereby we are going to be committed to become carbon neutral nation by no longer as early as 2050. That's a very definite answer. Meaning to say 2050 is a hard deadline that Malaysia will have to be a net zero or carbon neutral. What would that means really? What would that really means? Because to a lot of people, it sounds so remote. Sounds so foreign. I think that would basically means a lot. Like our day-to-day vehicle that we are driving to work, driving to shopping, driving to whatever. We will have to have a choice. We have to choose the choices of cars or vehicle that will have to be a lot more environmentally friendly. It could be either EV, electrical cars, vehicles, or it could be public transport. That's what it boils down to. Imagine we are now living the way that we are living now. Everybody basically have cars. Cars is just so rampant.
Yes.
It get crowded all over the place. So that probably will have to change the kind of change that we should be expecting.
Yes.
And further than that, power plant power plant. In Malaysia, unfortunately, we're still heavily relying on coal-fired power plant. And coal is one of the few that are known to be contributing significantly to climate change. And therefore, the world has actually moved away from coal-fired power plant. And Malaysia still has a lot of these power plants which are fired by coal. And Malaysia obviously will have to transition, and that's come under the National Energy Transition Roadmap, which has been announced by one of our ministers a couple of months ago, right? So that is, again, will have to be changed, and that will basically mean more green energy in the future, yeah? Currently, our green energy is still representing a very small percentage of the total energy mix in Malaysia.
Yes.
So that has to happen in the next 20 over years. Yep. And the next one, which is also quite critical, is that fossil fuel that we have been relying both as a source of revenue to the country,
Yes.
as well as the source of us operating. You know, we are so fossil fuel dependent economy in Malaysia. Yep. And unfortunately, fossil fuel are being seen, or it is one of the biggest contributor to climate change. And moving away from fossil fuel means a lot to us as well. Yep. Imagine companies, a lot of large corporations in Malaysia, you can name it. You know, I won't name it here in this session, but they are critically important to Malaysia economy. That will have to be transitioned, and that's why low carbon transition is such an important agenda as far as Malaysia is concerned, as far as this generation is concerned. You know, maybe Raida and myself, we may be at the last bit of the whole journey, but a lot of our students in MMU, you are right in the middle of it. You know, because the next 20 years, as you are growing out to be an adult, to be a professional in your career, this will be an issue that will be a key transformation or paradigm shift that will be impacting all of us here. Yep, all of you especially.
Yeah.
So I think maybe that's what I think I would posit here. Yeah, as far as environmental pillars are concerned, environmental pillars, no doubt, does cover a lot more other things.
Yes, agree.
But climate change definitely take the center stage. Unfortunately, yeah, there are a lot of other issues related to environment, which I'm quite sure a lot of our students in MMU are very much aware about it. You know,
The environment.
Environment.
The pillar.
the
E.
pillars, yeah.
So let's move on to the S
Okay,
here,
social,
right?
yeah.
The social, because I feel that when it comes to environment, I think most of us are aware.
What it's all about.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And then when we talk about climate change, they do understand.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
when it comes to the social, Mr. Ng, how are businesses addressing these social factors then?
Yeah. Well, social, as far as the business are concerned in the past, yeah, when you talk about social, it's all about stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders, right? Who are the stakeholders? Business naturally, in the old days until now, you know, customers is always at the first priority. Am I right?
Yes.
So customers has already been well embedded into the business activities. Yeah. Product that we produce are centered around what clients' needs are, you know, client satisfaction, and in order to make sure that there are more sales and more revenue and eventually more profit is what we're talking about. So client, no doubt, will be a center to all this stakeholders engagement and therefore social pillars. But often in the past, you know, we have not been focusing on other stakeholders.
Yes.
And that's when the other stakeholder comes in as far as social pillars are concerned. So if you were to interpret it, social is all about the human rights and equity. So how the relationship of an organization with whoever the stakeholders they were within the business premise or business operations. That's what it is all about. Yeah. So in the past, it's been client, but in addition to clients, there are so many other stakeholders. It could be the regulators who actually govern our business. Yeah. It could be the bankers who actually help, giving us a credit or giving financing our business activities and whatnot. It could be vendor who actually supplying work
So now
parts
the
to
word
us.
stakeholders itself, it's
A lot more
yeah,
broader
yeah,
in
yeah,
the scope
it's
of
broader.
ESG. Social is all about stakeholders. So in the past it's client, and now it's actually expanded to a lot more,
Correct.
including employee, which is very important part
Yes.
as far as Malaysia is concerned. Remember earlier on we mentioned about Malaysia as far as forced labor issue are one of the big red flag, you know. So therefore, when it comes to employee, whether we are treating our employee well, whether their welfare had taken
Yes.
care of, and all this, you know, whether the health and safety are they actually you know, being asked to do dangerous job without proper protection and whatnot. All these are the issues that we're talking about when we talk about social. Because the belief of ESG, for you to be a robust business, you know, you can't do without, obviously, you can't do without your client. Obviously, you have to comply with the government.
Correct.
Obviously, you have to make sure your suppliers are happy, or you may have disruption because the suppliers are not giving you what you're expecting, or your employee are not collaborating with you and not giving you the outcome you're expecting them to perform, right? All this is intricately relevant to the business, the business performance. So ultimately, the business through the ESG framework has come to realize that, hey, it's not just about profit making. It's about making sure all the stakeholders' need and expectation are well aligned. That's what it is all boils down to. So social does cover many aspects. You know, it does include diversity, equity, and inclusion. DEI, in short, we call it. It's about training and career development. It's about labor standard that we're observing. Obviously, Malaysia labor standards is probably one notch below what is internationally expecting. So something that we need. There's a significant gap. Pay equity. This is what the government has been working towards. You know, minimum wage and whatnot. You know, and human rights, health and safety, community engagement, data protection. And with data is a right. It's a human right. You know, you shouldn't be divulging my personal data simply, isn't it? So the data protection is one of it as well, and customer rights. You know, we can't be just selling customer with no regard of the impact to the customer as a result of using our product, isn't it? You know, that stewardship on products, you know, is something that we're looking at as well. So that, in a nutshell, cover what social pillars is about and how the companies has been embracing that. So in a nutshell, we have been talking about stakeholders.
Yes.
From a client-centric to become now multi-stakeholder-centric. That's what it
now
is all
it's
about.
broader.
Exactly, a lot more broader.
So now we move on to G.
Yep.
Right. Governance. So we move on to G. So we have covered the E, we have covered the S as social, and we have the last one, which is governance. Now, for governance, Mr. Could you explain what good governance looks like?
What good governance
Yes.
looks like. Okay, quite interesting. It's actually any company who are socially responsible. That's what I meant by good governance. Yeah. Good governance obviously it's a process. You know, it's a process where that define how certain issues has been managed within the company, how decision has been made. You know, governance in the business context will basically means how the board of directors have been chartering the futures for the companies. Yeah, so board is the main governance, governance body as far as the company operations are concerned. But when you look at the governance, we must associate it with who is the governance body in this case. Yeah. So we're looking at the country level. You know, if you are looking at country, what governance means for a country? It's the government, right?
Yeah.
How good is government performing? You know, are they transparent? Do they have integrity? Are they having a performance? You know, that sort of thing that we're looking at, right? Right policies. You know, company will be starting from board of directors, because the board of directors will be the one, has to be impartial, has to be competent, has to be demonstrating leadership in charting the future for the companies, making sure the interests of the shareholders are taken care of. From the education, I mean, we are in MMU, the MOE is the one who will be governing the whole anything to do with education in Malaysia. And of course, from a MMU perspective,
this can be from the student's perspective,
exactly,
right?
looking at the student perspective,
Students
what Pelajar or student affair,
The SRC.
they are the governance, they are the governance. So it really depends on the context in which you are looking at, in terms of governance. Like society, you're looking at the police, as an enforcement agency, and therefore they're governing certain regulation that we shouldn't be violating. NGO will also be governing us, and other authority, who knows, they will be governing us, So from a family perspective, it will be parents, the custodians, who will be governing you in terms of what you need to do and whatnot. So governance is actually the process in which an issue has been addressed or managed. So governance is certainly, from this, I think, That tells us that doing good is a big part of governance. Governance is all about doing good and doing ethically right decision. That's what it is all
Ethical.
boils down to. So that's why it come back to the earlier answer. Socially responsible companies or businesses, would be what I think a good governance look like. Yeah.
Okay. So, can we take one more bit on governance here?
Yep.
So, why companies are emphasizing strong leadership and ethical decision making? Then? Why?
Why? Why? I mean, that's a very good answer. A good question. Sorry, very good questions. Yeah. Well, think about it. You're talking two very different factors here. One is actually the leadership.
Yes.
Another one is the ethical decision, right?
decision-making.
Strong leadership is essential to any business. Yeah. Because strong leadership would direct the company, champion the right causes and whatnot, right? It takes a lot of leadership to drive changes within the company, to drive performance within the company, to drive compliance within the company. So leadership is no doubt a very essential recipe to any successful business. Am I right or not? But ethical decision is the second recipe which go along with that first recipe. With a strong leadership, but they're making an ethical decision, what would that become?
Yes.
Am I right or not? So by having the strong leadership, if the leaders are not well aligned with ESG philosophy, then most likely it's not going to be an ethical decision. So for ESG to be functional, for ESG to be effective, for ESG to be fully operationalized within company, these are the two essential things. Being a leaders, have the ability to drive changes and lead, and also have the right understanding to make the right decision, ethical decision for the company. That's what it all boils down to, and that's why
So
these two
your
are very
drive
important.
must be with
Ethical.
ethic.
Yep,
Yeah,
and
so-
socially responsible. Yep.
So interestingly, I would say that even though we can say that there are three pillars, E, S, and G, they are not, generally speaking, like separate entity.
they're not, they're not.
Right, they're like
Exactly.
in one group.
They're interrelated.
Yes.
They're interrelated.
So that's why when you actually talked about social, and then there will be a bit of ethical there, and then
Yeah.
a bit of this and that, sustainability, it goes around.
It goes
so
around,
it cannot
exactly.
say that the ESG is a separate entity. It can-
Exactly. They are not in silo. They are
yes,
interrelated.
the word silo there.
Yeah, they're interrelated.
Thanks again, Mr. Ern. I learn again. I learn more. The stories, the history, and now about the ESG. They're not silos and so on. And thank you everyone for watching. And don't go yet. We're still here, the third session. So stay with us, and we'll be back in a moment. So see you back. Welcome back, everyone. So this is the third session, and somehow the last session, but there are questions that need to be answered, and our expert here, Mr. Ng, will, give us more insights or more on the ESG, of course. So, Mr. Ng, we continue with the discussion here.
Yep.
Now, this discussion is more on how ESG applies directly to the students. Okay,
Yep.
so the question is, what ESG means to MMU students?
Very difficult question. I was trying to crack my head, how to answer that question, frankly, because ESG itself, like I mentioned earlier on, is actually targeting the businesses
Yes.
as in a performance, to evaluate the non-financial performance. That's what ESG is all about, right? So, but if put in the context of MMU student, what would that really means? Yeah, there are many aspects to it. Yeah, first and foremost, I think there are going to be changes that we need to be looking at ourselves. As far as the environmental front, to me, I felt it's about making the right and ethical choice. Yeah, on the principles of resource conservation, pollution prevention, and social conformance. These are the three things that I think is about. How ESG will be applicable for MMU students. I'm quite sure the student would have already been learned about energy efficient. They should not be turning on the AC, at certain degrees Celsius, whatnot, or water conservation. They should be like let the tape running when they're doing their washing or whatnot, and not to waste food and whatnot. All these are the essential elements that I'm quite sure, the student would have been taught about, But to me, I felt deep down, what ESG really meant, for the students is about making the right choice and a good choice. Yeah. So when you're buying something, look for things that would help the environment. Look at things that will help social, which are socially ethical. That's what it is. All boils down to. It's about making the right choices in life. Yeah. That's coming from environment and choices or whatnot. Yeah. How would social then be applicable? Yeah. How would social pillars then applicable to us? I think we gone back earlier on. Social is about stakeholders, right? The entire philosophy of ESG centered around who is our stakeholders, what are their need and expectation of you. Yeah. So as a student, depending on which context that you're going with,
It can be family.
Can be family. Yeah,
It can
family
be-
could be your stakeholders.
Yes.
Exactly. The lecturers could be your stakeholders. If you're doing a project together with your fellow students,
Yeah.
so as team members, and all the team members in the same project team would be your stakeholders.
True.
The supervising lecturers will be an essential team stakeholders. The university, itself would be a team. It will be stakeholders.
Yes.
If you are renting a room, living out there with your housemate, so your housemate could be your stakeholders. The
Landlord
neighbors that are
also.
living
Yes,
within, the
correct.
community you are living within is your stakeholders. Try to understand what would they be, their need and expectation, and therefore we need to be aligning with that. Is that not difficult? It is very difficult. Is it not easy? It is very easy, isn't it? So look from who's your stakeholders and what are their expectations. I think in the case of MMU student, is a lot more simpler, in terms of applying social pillars, because unlike businesses, all the different stakeholders, the expectation of a company could be very different.
Yes.
In the case of students, the expectation of the student are quite consistent. Yeah. Again, parents were looking at the growth, the growth in the person, the development in the person, in the students itself. Likewise, as the school, likewise as the lecturer. Am I right or not? Yeah.
Yes.
Only in certain circumstances that will be slightly different. So all this, I think, it's already built into a student life. You like it or not, one way or another, from a social perspective. Unlike from a business perspective, the expectation or need from the stakeholders will be very different. Yup. On one hand, you have investor who wanted to have profit and yet risks are minimum. Yup. That's what investors are looking
Yes.
at. You have your workers who are expecting better welfare, obviously better pay, better remuneration, which take away, which represent the cost to you. So they are contradicting needs and expectation when it comes to business stakeholders as opposed to a student stakeholders.
Yes,
So if you put yourself into this kind of philosophy, ESG philosophy, you can apply it in anywhere that you're going. Am I right or not? If
Yes.
you're on a hiking tour, who will be your stakeholders? obviously your teammate in your hiking tour, yep, the tour guide will be
The tour guide.
your whatever, the tour agency will be your stakeholders, and along the way, whoever that supported the whole tour, like the bus drivers, or the custom officers, all this potentially be your stakeholders. So it depends on which context you're putting yourself within, Social pillars basically boils down to stakeholders. And governance, again, depending on which context you're within, we have pointed out earlier on, as far as the MMU students are concerned, who are the governance, who are the governance body, and therefore they have certain rules and regulation that you need to be observing, right? And that's in your identity as a student. But when you are coming out of MMU, when you are interacting with the society, when you're out there, taking your bike along, going back to your hostel, whatnot, you are observing the society governance, that which is governed by the enforcement officer, like the police, right? That would be something that you're expecting as well. So to apply simply, you need to understand the philosophy of ESG. When you understand the philosophy of ESG is a very flexible philosophy that you will be able to apply, in any aspect, any context. Although I still need to emphasize that ESG, as far as business context is concerned, is a systematic matrices that allow us to evaluate the performance of a company on non-financial related aspects.
The framework is
that framework. But of course, we can flexibly apply to the students of MMU as well.
I can see the way you actually like mold the ESG in MMU students' life, which is I agree with you. So thank you so much for showing us or telling us how MMU students can integrate ESG into their personal lives and so on. Now, let's move on to the second part of the third session, which is the career part. I believe that one of the reasons why students further their studies in the tertiary education is to find the job that they want. So Mr. Ng, could you explain how understanding ESG can give students an advantage in the job market?
Well, early on, a lot of those philosophy of ESG, it does apply in any context, regardless of whether you are going to be your future career going to be in a business, or your future career could be running your own business, or your future career could be working as a researcher in a university or whatnot. It does apply differently in different contexts in which you are in. But I can summarize how would that affect or impact the future career of MMU graduate, into two different categories. One is actually direct impact. They are profession, they are job functions that will be directly impacted by ESG. Yeah. And then there are also other indirect impact, job function or profession that may be indirectly impacted. In a nutshell, to me, I felt everybody, you can either be directly involved or indirectly involved or impacted. Anybody will fall within that two categories. There's no third category where they are not relevant. No such category. Everybody are directly or indirectly relevant.
It's business.
It's business, exactly. If you survive, in the industry, if you survive of getting a job, for instance, or even starting your own business, or even if you don't start your own business and put yourself as a household or become a housewife or whatnot, it still apply. Am I right? Not, isn't it the same? So let me maybe elaborate a little bit more on what are those professions that we directly involved in this, Like I mentioned earlier on, ESG, as far as the business context is concerned, is actually meant for the investor. Meant for the investor. So accounting profession, accounting finance, accounting profession, economists, will be directly involved as far as ESG is concerned, because ultimately, once all this ESG issues has been managed, the human rights issue has been managed, environmental pollution has been managed. Essentially, it will come to a point where they need to start reporting or communicate the findings or the performance to the outside world, isn't it? So that communication part of it,
report,
it has to be an ESG report, and therefore most of the time the accountant will have to understand what exactly it means to the business performance, and they are the one in the middle of that whole thing. A lot of people have confused, in fact we have worked with so many industries, thought ESG is the environmental professions scope, you know. And some would thought that
CSR.
no, this is actually HR scope, you know.
damn.
Yeah. Oh, no, this is health and safety department scope, you
So at
know.
the end, the nucleus is the finance.
Exactly. And I wouldn't say nuclear is finance. I probably would think that they play a very important part. They play a very important part. Because I mentioned earlier on about the Michael Bloomberg started out the
Yes.
TCFD, right? Because, well, TCFD, of course, no longer is going to be, it will be transitioned to something else, you know. But then, at the end of the day, I'm a finance industry. ESG is meant for finance industry. Finance industry wanted to know the financial impact. Whatever the narrative of ESG, ultimately, it has to be crystallized to financial impact. That's the common languages for us to communicate with the investor and finance industry. And that's the reason why accounting personnel, finance personnel will be very relevant in this directly involved in this particular case, you know. They probably are not the one who will be, you know, at the core of the issues, like they are addressing the health and safety, they're addressing the HR issue. They probably are not the one.
The carbon, so
Or carbon or whatnot. But the direct impact to the finance is the one that the financial impact will be the one that we need to be monitoring and at top of it, on top of it. But other professions such like engineering will be very relevant as well. You know, be it whatever engineering you are in, you know. If you are a mechanical engineering, you are looking at yourself, making sure the process is a lot more efficient, energy efficient, resource conserving. You know, those are all the philosophy. You know, nobody will be now designing a machine that's going to be consuming tons of fossil fuel. It doesn't make sense anymore, right? If you're heading that direction, you're very wrong, you know, as far as the future is concerned, you know, because the future is going to be greener, the future is going to be more efficient, the future is going to be AI or Industry 4.1 and whatnot, yeah. So all these are very much aligned with ESG. So if you're an engineer, be it civil, be it chemical, be it mechanical, everybody are going to be more efficient, more resource efficient, more energy efficient, more labor efficient or whatnot, right? So that's what ESG is all about. Yeah. If you are into the, especially of those professions such as environmental engineering, like myself, you know, I'm an environmental scientist and come environmental engineers, and then we are directly relevant because all this aspect, you know, especially on the environmental pillars, we are directly relevant to that, you know. And for those HR background, you know, people with HR background, they are directly relevant as well because they are right in the middle of that, you know, and handling all the employee issue. Even people with sales, for instance, if I'm a marketing person, eventually I graduated from MMU and I started to become a sales and marketing manager or whatnot, yeah. Again, who's your stakeholders? The client. So again, you may not be...
You need to apply ethical way of addressing...
Exactly. You need to engage with your client to understand the need so that the client continue staying with you.
Yes.
Right? And giving you the revenue and the sales that you're expecting.
Yeah.
So that's what it boils down to. Even if I were putting myself to be you know, a purchasing department, somebody who do the purchasing, negotiating the vendor. Again, vendor is relevant. So what are the professions not directly involved? These are all the professions that are directly involved in the ESG space. Directly involved. Then who are those who are indirectly involved? Who are those? I can't think of much, you know, but I reckon that in MMU we have cinematic arts.
Yeah.
Arts, right? So I can't figure out exactly where it is placed, but you like it or not, you know, it's just it may not be directly into that profession, but in their daily delivery of the work itself, you have to be considering that too.
They
right?
can be the platform.
They can exactly to communicate, you know, coming with the social medias that are relevant to ESG and whatnot. I also saw one of a program which is about strategic communication.
Yes,
is that a course by itself?
Yes.
You know what? In the whole spectrum of this thing, I mentioned about at the end of the day, it's about what is the financial impact, and therefore the accountant and finance people will be relevant, right? But how to bring the narrative to the public in such a way they understand and not misrepresented. Those are very important.
The tone that you use,
exactly.
How you capture the audience attention, and
your
so
strategy in communication, the content, and how you want to communicate and whatnot on the performance of non-ESG related matters. You know, when you're talking about non-financial related matters, it's so much difficult and different. Finance is quite straightforward, you know, because it's just
numbers. I cannot say that.
It's quite straightforward, you know. But when it comes to non-ESG, it's a lot more different, you know. How you phrase it, how how you communicate it will mean very differently to people.
True.
You know, so that's how I see all this. Any profession that I did not mention that's not
I
relevant.
think you have covered all.
We cover everything. Legal, maybe lawyer. I
Yeah.
heard that MMU
We
Malacca
have-
is very. That's one of
We
your
have good law students.
good law student, right? Yeah. Again, that's thanks to all your lecturers. They have been giving a lot of good compliments of the law students. Yeah. Again,
not all
they are
students.
directly relevant, especially in the future worlds. Yeah. The world has changed so much. You know, the conventional ways of us handling an issue will have to be now embedded or infused with some ESG elements. Yeah. Say, for instance, just picking it up. Yeah, I'm just picking it up. In the past, I wouldn't be bothered the carbon that I'm generating, but now carbon is a credit, is a potential commodity, and therefore giving me revenue. Obviously, that's not what within the context of conventional business, isn't it? How would that mean from a legal practice perspective? You know, all these are the things that I think for the legal profession they should be looking at. You know, how would you be able to make a difference in terms of all this different contexts or that the ESG has brought about to the whole business landscape. Yeah. So what else do I need to do? Medical? You don't have medical students, isn't it? But even medical, you know, it's in a way, you know, relevant.
Yes.
Because healthcare, you know, if you're putting yourself outside of the business context, but the general public interest context, you know, medical is very relevant from a society perspective. You know, so yeah.
Yeah, the social part.
So ESG therefore is here to stay. ESG is going to be part and parcel of life, you know, or business life, personal life, whichever one you want to put it. Yeah.
So we cannot just only solely looking at business perspective. You also it can be.
It
as
can
you
be.
said.
You look at it as a philosophy that can apply in many ways. Yeah.
Yeah,
Of
and-
course, the exact application is still going back to the business. Yeah.
Correct. So finally, yeah, everyone. Finally, let's wrap up with a look at the latest trends and developments in ESG. Mr. Could you share some of the latest trends in ESG?
I almost couldn't quite figure out where to start with because there's so much of development going on as far as ESG space is concerned.
Yeah.
You need to bear in mind, ESG covered a broad spectrum of all kind of issues. Yeah, each one of the issue itself is an expertise. No, that it takes years for somebody to be called themselves a social specialist, for years for somebody to call themselves a tax specialist or whatnot, right?
Yes.
So there's so much of development going on. I think to nail it down, to kind of summarize it, it could be very difficult. But rather than going that direction, let me go on a more high level. Yeah.
Okay.
So at the end of the day, I mentioned earlier on business. There are two main themes that are going on. One is actually we heard about carbon credit earlier on. Yeah.
Yes.
Carbon credit is a alternate financing method, you know, for the environmental cost to be built into the business decision. Am I right? Not carbon.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So likewise, the future would be that all those other issues that are currently not being costed into as part of the cost of an operation, business operation, would eventually have to be costed in. You know. So what could be those other environmental issues? Carbon being one of those, but we have been also seeing that plastic.
Yes.
Yeah, we have been seeing plastic credit plastic credit. Yeah, carbon credit is what is currently now we are, you know, but plastic credit, nature credit, because the
Everything's
nature
credit.
biodiversity has its value, but in the past the businesses has been harvesting or utilizing, extracting the resources from the nature, you know, the biodiversity and whatnot, yeah, that had not looked into the natural capital, and that natural capital is a cost by right, you know, which has not been factored in. So we will be seeing more and more of this mechanism, the alternate financing mechanism, to be applied in many aspects of those environmental related matters. That's one big evolution that I would think it will be charting the future. And the second one, which is quite interesting, which come back to the basic ESG framework itself. Yeah. In the ESG framework, there's one element which we were talking about earlier on in our last questions about communication, right? The reporting.
Yes,
Yep.
correct.
The reporting is a very important instrument because that allow the performance of non-financial aspect to be communicated with a bigger audience, right? So there are a lot of movement that has been going on. So ESG, well, it has already had that long of a history, right? So globally, there are so many different initiatives as far as ESG reporting are concerned, that have developed over the years. And we have seen the recent trend that all these different standards or framework has started to slowly converge, yeah. Um, Bursa, based on Bursa's sustainability reporting guide, it was primarily basing on a global reporting initiative, which is
Okay.
an initiative started more than 20 something years ago, yeah. So it has now moved towards a very different framework, which is what we call IFRS, International Financial Reporting Standards. You see, financial reporting standard. So that's why finance people are relevant, So all these different reporting standards, we have seen it to be starting converging. In fact, Malaysia has came out with a policy or framework, which is what we call the National Sustainability Reporting Framework. In recognition of all this development that have been going on, Musa came out with the Sustainability Reporting Guide way back in 2015, yeah, before, the hoo-ha about all this different framework that
Yeah.
came about, of course, now all these different international standard has converged in and harmonized to become one, which looks like it will be IFRS under the International Sustainability Standard Board (ISSB). So that's one of the major development. And Malaysia, through our National Sustainability Reporting Framework, has basically adopted IFRS both S1 and S2. So I mentioned earlier on about TCFD, right? The task force that started by the Michael Bloomberg to try to define the monetary term or financial impact of all
the
these kind of
non-profit.
related issues that would form part of the standard under IFRS S1 and S2. Yeah. So those are the major development that are going on, that latest development that's going on in the world, which I think will continue to be the main stage, mainstream that we'll be seeing in the next couple of years. I believe. Yeah, I know this is getting into a little technical. Yeah, a little technical. The reporting part of it, it's essential to us, but then it may not be directly relevant to MMU student. But as far as this profession, ESG profession is concerned, this is one very important agenda as far as this fraternity,
It's the future.
ESG fraternities are concerned, because you're talking about the standards, the standards has now converged to become a big standards. So that standard would be the go-to standard that we're looking at, as far as the fraternity, the profession are concerned. Yep.
I'm so sorry, everyone. I never thought that ESG is a very interesting topic. I could go
We
on
should
and
have
go
spent
on.
3 hours, right?
Can we? But I know all of you, I'm not sure, but I believe that it's like a storytelling, starting from history and then moving on to latest development, and it's interesting. Okay, so, but thank you so much, Mr. Ng. I had a
Yeah.
great time.
Yeah, I had a
do.
great time too. It was so nice talking to you,
Okay.
Rada. Yeah.
Okay, everyone. So thank you so much, Mr. Ng, for sharing your expertise with us today. I think we can all agree that ESG is not just a topic for the future, it's something we need to engage with now. So, whether it's environmental sustainability, social responsibility, or good governance, these principles are shaping both our personal and professional future. So, a big thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so a big thank you to Mr. Ng, a big thank you to MMU, a big thank you to the team in front of me here.
And the audience.
Yeah, and the
Our
audience.
stakeholders, yeah.
Our stakeholders. Now we're going to
Yes.
use that term now. And thank you for being a great audience, yeah, and engaging one, I believe. Okay, so now don't go anywhere. I think for MMU students, this is the golden moment, which our team here will share you the QR code for you to scan. This QR code will appear on your screen for marking your attendance. Here is our QR code for the attendance. Now, you can also find the QR code on EBWise if you prefer to access it later. Okay, so you can actually pause, take for a couple of seconds. Okay, so I think let's move on to the next, which is the closing remark. Now, Mr. Ng, I was, planning, how I'm going to close this session and all. So I was looking for famous quotes. I saw that famous quotes on ESG, somewhat like that, from Greta. And finally, I choose this quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., which I don't know, I feel I like it and I want to say it to all of you. So the quote from Dr. Martin Luther King, "The time is always right to do what is right." I think it's very ESG there, the trademark. So as students and future leaders, you have the power to make a difference by incorporating these principles into your everyday lives. So thank you for joining us. Thank you again, Mr. Ng.
Thank you.
Yes, and let's continue striving to do what is right both personally and professionally. So with that, thank you again and goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Wonder how fast intelligent machines run on 5G? At MMU, you'll find the answer. Wonder how creative content and online businesses are mastered? At MMU, you'll find the answer. Wonder how cybersecurity and law function? At MMU, you'll find the answer. Find out all these and many more at Multimedia University, because MMU is you, leading the digital future. Visit mmu.edu.my.